Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty, and this video is basically about Ruthless or Hard Mode, Project Hard Mode, that they officially announced today. And I read through in its entirety the post. I'll put it in the description in the pinned comment below. And there's a lot here, and I am not very excited for what I read. I think there's a lot of really bad ideas. I think there are very few good ideas, and I think most of it is really just not difficult or not hard, but really mostly cumbersome and hindering. And I don't think this game mode appeals to the vast majority of them, which again they admit themselves. But I have wrote down every single thing and broken it up in section from their post. I just want to go over basically them line for line and things that I found interesting. So I'll read it as we're going through it. So the first, it's basically 4 different segments, or 5 different segments. What Ruthless is not: item scarcity, limiting crafting, skill and support gem changes, additional changes. Just to clarify, this game mode has been something that they've been loosely working on for about 1.5 years now. So that being said, let's dive into this. So Ruthless is a game mode about friction, tension, and anticipation. That's how they describe it. It's brutally difficult, but overcoming that difficulty feels highly rewarding. I already have a problem with this for 2 reasons. One, I don't think it is brutally difficult, and you'll hear why as we go through it. And who are you to say what I feel is rewarding? A lot of people don't really have a ton of reward from overcoming immense difficulty. Sometimes people just like to chill and play a game. Again, not for everybody, but we're going to break it down as we go. In a world where your items are far below par, every single item drop has the potential to be the breakthrough one you need. This also just applies to Path of Exile regularly. It's kind of like describing the concept that you could identify any rare and it can be a 6 tier 1 mirror item. It's just more prevalent in a game mode with no loot. Ruthless is a mode that reimagines traditional understanding of where Path of Exile's endgame is. This is also strange, because really this is much like Path of Exile 8 to 10 years ago. If you played Path of Exile in its initial alpha or beta section, most of these constraints and changes are going to be like a Vietnam flashback for you, and you're going to think, why God would you want to go back to that? But this is about, as we discussed, friction, tension, anticipation. Really, this is heavily about nostalgia, which we'll go through in a second. It redefines the entire game as the end game. So it's supposed to be the abject difficulty of progressing is part of the entire experience. Even reaching higher campaign acts, let alone maps, is an achievement. Just to clarify, and a bit of a spoiler, Ruthless is actually not any more difficult than Path of Exile in any way, shape, or form. There are no, as of right now, defined additional modifiers for difficulty or for enemy movement speed. The only real constraint is a restriction on your own gear and movement speed, but people have piss easily gone through the entire campaign, basically naked, myself included. Therefore, this will not be very difficult as it is described right now. You might get to Act 4 without equipping a pair of rings. I already do that. That's not very uncommon. But each ring you find represents a huge power boost. I mean, sure. Ruthless is a mode where most items are normal rarity. Okay? You don't see a lot of magic items and even fewer rare items. So there is scarcity where comes the loot, which we'll get into in a second. But finding a rare item of a base type you're looking for feels amazing. Describing something along the lines of finding your first Imperial Claw versus another claw. Ruthless is a mode where you find very little crafting currency. You might only find 1 alchemy orb throughout the entire campaign. I don't think I found more than 10 in 3.19, but interesting point of comparison. Then they say that orb lets you convert any base item of your type to a rare item. I find it very interesting that they're describing the function of an alchemy orb in a post regarding a game mode for essentially catered towards the 0.01% of the player base. Seems a bit like you're talking down to your audience, but that's fine. Ruthless is nostalgic. That I will admit. This reeks of Alpha Path. This reeks of Diablo 1 and 2. We picked the name probably because it was the third of 4 difficulty levels was called back in closed beta. So this is true, back in closed beta, there were 4 difficulties. It was normal, cruel, ruthless, and merciless. Ruthless, like they said, being the 3rd. Aspects like item scarcity and support gems being valuable really felt like the early days of Path of Exile, just without desync. I still experience desync, and there's actually more parts that they refer to as the nostalgia of old, which most people would just consider very poor game design, and very poor quality of life, and overall a bad time, which we're going to get to. And don't forget, some people's bad times is a good time, but I just think this is objectively bad. But again, we'll get to that. So first section, item scarcity. The core Ruthless experience is that you don't have strong enough items to handle the content. Every item that drops has the potential to be an upgrade to your current gear. Both of these core principles are just Path of Exile in a nutshell, but that's fine. In Ruthless, the quantity of items dropped has been massively reduced through all content of the game. Kind of like what happened at the beginning of 3.19, but now it's intentional. The rate of finding magic, rare, and unique items has been massively reduced all throughout the game. Same joke from the previous sentence. Rings, amulets, and belts are much more rare, so accessories are more rare than base gear. They cannot be purchased from vendors. Most league reward systems have been changed to only grant 1 item rewards that are specific to that league. For example, cluster jewels only come from Delirium, plus items from the core drop pool. Cluster jewels, currently, the best way to acquire them is by doing heist, and from demolition heists. They very scarcely drop from Delirium traditionally, so this will be even more scarce. In Ruthless, getting items from the core drop pool is a valuable reward, especially when there is an item rarity bonus. I'm not sure what that sentence means, to be honest. Many deterministic items like divination cards or Onigoroshi cannot be obtained. I'm not sure again what specific ones, but we're assuming that most of them are just gone. Probably any divination card that leads to a unique specifically. For example, like the obliteration cards probably just don't exist. Many bosses like Adziri that guarantee unique drops still do, but are often harder to access. This actually gets referenced later on, which we'll get to, but all Val side zones are just gone. Limited crafting. In Ruthless, most of your items come from killing monsters. That's also like Path of Exile. It's hard to find magic, rare, and unique items, and it's even harder to craft them. Okay? Crafting is a powerful luxury that you'll have to use sparingly for the right items. That is the initial tenet of Path of Exile. I still think that's a good sentence. I wish there was a way to separate currency and crafting in Path of Exile, but that was one of the base core fundamental aspects of the game, and we're way past that now. The drop rate of crafting currency has been massively decreased. The rate at which you receive shards of crafting currency from vendoring has been decreased. Master crafting, not available. Crafting bench and recipe plinths, gone. Veiled chaos, binding, dominance, influenced exalteds, and awakeners, also gone. This next line, I think, is an interesting concept, probably the only one they've introduced so far, which is when an influenced item is reforged or the influence modifier removed, its influence is lost. This is kind of injecting some scarcity and value into influence items, which I think is interesting. So far, the only interesting thing I've seen in this listing. Most vendor recipes are not available, so no making +1 wands. A few new Ruthless-specific vendor recipes have been introduced to be known at a later date. Skill and support gems. So in Ruthless, skill gem drops matter. Support gems drops matter a whole lot. Gems cannot be purchased from vendors, meaning your only rate of acquisition from gems, for the most part, is just drops, of which everything is reduced. The Fixture of Fate and Death and Rebirth quests give you a token, which can be used from Ciosa to purchase a level 31 or lower gem. Support gems can only be found as random drops, which they mentioned earlier. You cannot obtain them deterministically. Ruthless is a league of item scarcity. That's referencing the fact that there's going to be a alpha test of it as a league. It is not a league, it is a game mode in its base form. When items are scarce, they are exciting to find, exciting to look for, and exciting to trade. That is basically just that's just a lie. That's just simply not true. Scarcity does not denote value or level of excitement. There have been uniques in Path of Exile that have been incredibly rare and incredibly shit for a very long time. Items like uniques like Yilfbin's Trickery or even Tidebreaker have been realistically worthless and incredibly rare. Things like the Brine Crown. These are not exciting outside of the constraints of this game mode, And even then, it's questionable because, again, historically, rarity does not denote value. But we move on. We are defining support gems as items. That sentence eludes me, but that's fine. This means some builds are hard to assemble, and careful playing is needed for solo self on Ruthless players. Again, this game mode can be played as SSF in hardcore, softcore, or not. You can be played in trade if you want. They're basically putting a premium on support gems as in the old days, where like maybe trading for a multi-strike costs you an Exalted or something like that. It's an interesting path they've chosen. Gems gain far less experience than they do in regular path. It's a lot harder to level up your skills, which is another access of reduced character power. So, neutering your skills, gems levels, and rate of acquisition for gems and support gems. A melee character's damage comes from their weapons. I do love that sentence because it's just fundamentally incorrect, but that's another here. I mean, a melee character's damage comes from the weapons. If I'm playing Elemental Double Strike, my damage comes from my auras for the most part. My damage comes from my jewels. I understand where they're coming from, but it just shows a fundamental misunderstanding with certain aspects of the game, but that's fine. It'll actually makes less sense as we go on. Spellcasters get a lot of their damage from their gems as they level up. This change helps reduce the power gap between the two playstyles. Their thought process is if we reduce the rate in which gems level, therefore it'll even out the fact that spellcasters really are gaining most level from gems compared to melee weapons or melee builds that gain most weapons from weapons, which are hard to craft and hard to find. Ipso facto, it's more even. You're just going to play a caster until you get a weapon. You're not going to just, struggle between the two. There will be a definitive best way of leveling as there is in regular path. So I think this entire game mode, as we get more and more through it, and as you learn of more and more the constraints and restrictions, you'll realize that the actual build diversity of this game mode, being Ruthless, will be heavily diminished. There will be no game mode, I think, in Path of Exile with worse build diversity and more limited build scope and place field than Ruthless. It'll have the most narrow scope of build diversity because the cream will rise to the top the fastest, since there is the most shit to wade through. That being said, it also means that when you're farming an area for gems, you can grind for gem experience. that is a passive accruement of all plays through all games. This next line sucks. Almost all movement skills are not available. They think not having movement skills is a significant increase to difficulty. I would massively disagree. What it is a significant decrease in build diversity, like I just mentioned. You're not going to play builds that will ever rely on the concept of being able to utilize a movement skill unless you're basically choosing to invest in the movement speed on tree, or just accept the fact that you're going to get hit. What does that mean? Well, it means you're going to play builds that have disgustingly high armor, HP, and suppression, or max block builds with max suppression, or builds that invest in high movement speed on tree. All of that investment comes at a cost of you having to redirect points and redirect build resources from things like damage and clear speed. You have to put those points into your survivability because you now can't move. So as a byproduct, you're basically going to have to limit how you build because you're now forced to do it. It's the same concept of how in hardcore high tier events such as the Gauntlet, you'll only see really 2 or 3 builds being played because the constrictions of the event and the constraints mean you're going to have to only play these certain builds because they can only perform at this high level. This is that to the next degree. You're going to have 1 or 2 builds that'll rise to the top and everything else will feel pale in comparison effectively. So they list everything. The movement skills are a couple are allowed, like Cyclone's allowed, but they just removed Venom Jar because they said it relies on Rolling Blades and is hence not available. It doesn't. It only relies on Rolling Blade for single target. Strange that they would just remove it outright, but that's neither here nor there. Same thing with like Body Swap and Charge Dash. Those are just gone. Unfortunate. Last section is additional changes, and we'll go to a little bit here. Ruthless is challenging and punitive. It contains a number of changes that make Path of Exile harder and allow skilled players to differentiate themselves from everyone else. This is like a really weird thing. This sentence, the first one's sure, it's challenging and punitive, that I understand. It contains a number of changes that make Path of Exile harder and allows skilled players to differentiate themselves from everyone else. You're basically saying that like it gives people the right to like say they're better than other people, which is very strange. I mean, it's not that it's not incorrect. If you are level 90 in Ruthless versus someone level 90 in Trade Softcore, you're probably abjectly better than them. It's just strange that that's like a plinth that they want to stand on. Like, just this game mode contains a level of EP measuring. Enjoy. A compounding character experience penalty applies from 68 onwards, meaning from 68 to 100 progressively gets harder and harder, more so than regular path. It takes a lot of investment to achieve a high-level Ruthless character. Correct. Item drops are not allocated to specific party members. Free-for-all loot. Items really matter. Better pick them up before someone else does. This is a weird one again. This is like the no movement skill thing, or it just seems like this is... I understand it's a game mode steeped in nostalgia, but this seems like you're going back in time. It's like, we're having a party and we're choosing not to take the polio vaccine. We have the system in place because we've all agreed as a people that having free-for-all loot in a party setting is cancerous because it actually, again, we talked about hindering the scope in which builds are diverse. No one's going to want to play range builds if they're not within point-blank range of loot, if loot is all that important. If you have something like a Shavs drops, and the guy who just happens to be in melee because he's playing a melee build picks it up, and then just now has your balls in a vice, that's quite unfortunate because you chose to play a range build. So this is just one of those times where, again you're stipending build diversity because in a party setting someone wants to rather be in melee range. It's just weird. But fine. Backwards in time we go. Flasks and mana life flasks are not restored upon entering town. Vendors that sell flasks can refill them for you. So refilling flasks at vendors it's the exact same concept of just going to town. You're just giving yourself an extra step. So this isn't difficulty. Like most of stuff isn't difficulty. It's tedium. You're giving yourself one extra little button to push. This disincentivizes the strategy of using portals as an instant full heal. I mean, I'm not sure who out there really uses portals as an instant full heal, even in a hardcore setting. But sure, I'll give that to you. Onslaught does not grant movement speed. This relates to the absence of movement skills. I'm not sure if Elusive does, but Onslaught does not. This next line I could see as objectively being an interesting concept, and it could be added to the base game if they chose, and it wouldn't be overtly offensive, unlike most everything else here. If you die near a quest boss in the campaign, a chunk of its life is recovered. So this just basically prevents corpse running or disincentivizes corpse running, making you have to maybe not build as glass cannony while progressing through the campaign. So interesting concept. I don't know how much of a chunk, if it's like 25% or whatever, but at least it promotes you having to build more well-rounded characters while leveling, which I think is probably fine objectively. Hardcore Ruthless characters not migrate standard. They're just permanently dead. This also could probably just go into the base game. The concept of a hardcore character in a lot of the games just means pretty much DOD. You're dead. You're deleted. I was honestly surprised initially, even 8-10 years ago when Path of Exile had hardcore, and it wasn't just like you're dead, you go to standard. So this is a thing. Utility flasks can't gain charges while active and have lower durations, so they've been shit on. Scarabs only enable mechanics. They don't scale in power with their tiers. Instead, higher tiers are needed for higher tiers of maps. So rustic for white, polished for yellow, gilded for red, and then wingeds just aren't there. There's a Ruthless specific Atlas passage tree, which means it's probably neutered to all hell, which is again is in line with all this. I'd imagine every single guaranteed mechanic is removed. Probably something like the guaranteed essence per map is like a 10% chance, if maybe that, right? Content for past leagues is encountered less often. You don't accumulate daily rewards. Val side zones and kindling and stealing orbs do not exist, which is interesting. So fuck you if you have RSI. I guess you better install your macros for flasks again. Get fucked. This last line simply is incorrect. Well, it's correct, but they're wrong for the wrong reasons. Ruthless uses separate item filters, which must be created specifically for it. Everything uses separate item filters, but that's interesting. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe the formatting's different? The way this is worded is very strange, because the next line makes it even stranger. If players use regular Path of Exile ones, they would filter out items that are actually very useful in Ruthless. So, you could use whatever filters you want in any game mode. You could swap between them to your heart's content, and they're just a notepad file. Filtering out items that are useless, who are you to say what I think is useful, I guess, is strange, Most of these things are just like talking. This is why this game mode is really strange, right? So like, they want to say that gems are supposed to be the scarce thing. They want to treat supports like items, right? Once you have every support, they're worthless. You have every support. Eventually you get them all 2020. Just a matter of time, right? All this is just time gating. None of this is difficulty. Getting less loot, getting less supports, not having access to vendors, it just slows you down. Something's harder. Maven's not hitting harder because you have less gems, right? Just takes longer. Just takes a little bit longer, right? This is all just a slow thing. None of this is a hard thing. This is all just a slow thing. This is one giant speed bump. They're treating this league, and they're pitching it as if they're saying, okay, it takes 1 week for you to kill Maven with the gear you have right now. If we give you 2 less supports and half the gear, when you fight Maven at the end of this first week, it'll be twice as hard, if not 3 times as hard. This is ruthless. That's what they're saying. What they're not realizing, and the problem with all of this, is that I'm not going to fight Maven after 1 week with half my gear and 2 less supports. I'm just going to grind for 2 more weeks, because that is how this game works. Whether you put constraints on how much time it takes, whether you put constraints in the drop rates, I'm not going to just do Maven after 100 white maps. I'm going to do Maven after 1,000 white maps, or 2,000 white maps. I'm going to get my build to near the exact same power level it was previously, because that's what we've done every single league for 35 leagues in a row. Anytime something gets nerfed, we don't do it sooner, we don't do it faster, we just grind a little bit more. Because this is Path of Exile, a game from Grinding Gear Games, where we grind for gear. That is the game you've made. That is the fundamental disconnect here. Nothing about this is actually difficult, really. It's just gonna take a little bit more time. And that's that. And now, what is the one thing that the average Path player has over and over again? Every league, the benchmark for completing the base game has been pushed. If basically what it took 3 months ago to get, to Act 7, whatever, to Act 10, to maps, now takes an hour longer. Every league, it takes an hour longer to get to the same place you went to. An hour extra, hour a day. The one thing the average Path player doesn't have, considering how vast the game is and how much there is to do, is time. And you made a game mode that requires more time. There's probably 1,000 people that play the game enough to where this is going to be lucrative. But as they described, Ruthless is not for everybody. Game mode about nostalgia. And they say that, they haven't spent, hasn't not consuming significant development resources. So I guess that's fine. It's a pet project. But objectively, none of this is difficult. It's just time consuming. My concern is not that it doesn't consume significant development resources. It's that it's consuming, I guess, any development resources. And again, they specified development resources. Maybe it takes significant balance resources. Maybe it takes significant PR resources. The fact of the matter is, this game was being made. There's a news post about it. Effort is being put forth into it. And I don't really understand why. It boggles my mind, personally. It's, I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but this seems like the worst possible way to do it. Because none of this is even making the game harder. It's just making the game slower. And I don't think the thing that Path of Exile needs right now, as a game, as a whole, for it to be more successful and more healthy for the vast majority of players, is to be clunky, slower, and really just annoying. But I don't know. Time will tell. We'll see the numbers. We'll see how many people play it 3 months from now, 6 months from now. If I had to give what I would do in this situation, I wouldn't release this as a game mode. They say it's a game mode that's being made by senior developers as a pet project, and undoubtedly this is like Chris Wilson's ultimate meme vision, if that's what, whatever, it's the tinfoil hat thing, right? Wouldn't release it. I would just keep it for themselves. They want to make a game mode that's basically every quality of life cancer thing reintroduced back into the game and then slowed down 10 times. They could play it themselves, but I just think like this is a thing that people are going to think is draining lots of resources, is a major detraction from the base game. It just seems like a really strange thing to introduce, considering so behind on Path 2, on mobile, on a lot of things. So I'm curious what you guys think. That's been the entire reading of it, though. We'll see if they give more information. If you're going to play Ruthless, I hope you have a good time. I hope it's something you're looking forward to. I hope it's something you enjoy thoroughly. It's free to test out. Not yet. You have to fill out a form to do it. This is what the form looks like. I've already filled it out just to see if, just to shits and giggles, to see if I would even get in. But yeah, alpha testing soon. They're expecting to publicly release alongside 3.20 in December. So, doesn't hurt to try it. Might be fun just for like a day or two, but I can't imagine this is a game mode that has any sort of longevity, any sort of interest, considering it really is every single bad idea in Path of Exile that has been fixed being re-implemented. But, again, the numbers will vote, right? We'll see the player base. If a large chunk of people playing it, then I am wrong and they are right, and the people have decided. Let me know what you guys think. There's a lot of things that are objectively very strange here. And, yeah, I would suggest giving it a read yourself. Reddit is not happy, to put it mildly. They are confused as well, as expected. Even the comments here are pretty confused as well. You have a lot of interesting people's concerns. This is a big one. Hopefully this doesn't bleed over into the core game. I've seen this like 3 or 4 times when looking at it. IMO, it's a waste of time and resources. Who knows? Either way, I'm Matt Lighty. I'll see you guys, whatever, on stream. And let me know what you think about the Ruthless Hard Mode project and what it represents. If I were to play it, and if you all wanted me to play it, I would do it. If I were to do it, I would do it in solo self-found, don't do it in hardcore, because, like they mentioned, where the fuck was it? It's a change that makes Path of Exile hard and allows skilled players to differentiate themselves from no one else. If you're not playing solo self-found hardcore Ruthless, in the words of Chris Wilson, you're a big pussy.